Hello and welcome to The Movie Trap. I am Zach Powers.
And I am Chris Boroff.
And I'm Russell Carlson.
And if you're a new listener, which is pretty likely because this is the third episode, if you don't count the 50 episodes from 10 years ago that had a slightly different premise. This is a film podcast in which each of us, we pick a movie, a variation on a theme, and then at the end, we vote on which is the best of the movies presented, and that person gets to continue the legacy of the theme for the next go-around. That's the short summary. This week, our loose theme is isolation, or being trapped, appropriately enough, because of the name of the podcast, and because if you're listening to this in the future, we living in the quarantine times, baby.
That's right.
Uh-huh. Yep,
when the history books will write about, and also I've noticed a common theme is Pyrrhic victories. Isn't that? I mean, like all three of these movies are very, very similar in that theme.
Standard issue. We gonna be spoiling the movie that is in the name of this podcast.
Very, very true. Spoiling the fuck out of. So I guess
anybody who is still wondering how the end of Color Out of Space ends, it's been out for a hot 100 years now. So you can
it was written in 1927. It was written in 1927. But I guess Boroff, since it was your round, why don't you go ahead and summarize this this piece of movie and give us what you got?
Absolutely. Okay, well, this movie is The Color Out of Space. It is a movie that, for all intents and purposes, shouldn't exist because the director is a guy named Richard Stanley, who is known for having been involved with The Island of Dr. Moreau, which is a infamously troubled production where he got fired, and it turned into a somewhat phantasmagoric nightmare.
Right, and that was the happy part of the story. That it was actually okay when he got fired, and then it all went downhill. But that's what you get when you cast Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando.
I guess Elijah Wood, of all people, over at Spectre Vision, they were looking to make an H.P. Lovecraft thing, and the long and short of this story, to give you a very quick understanding, is that it's a family trapped on a farm where a meteorite hits. And the meteorite is from outer space, and it starts causing all sorts of strange problems as the reality and the physicality of people start bending around it.
I think the fact that it's a meteorite makes it from outer space, big guy. You rarely see meteorites from under the sea, or at least that they come from under the sea. You might find them under the sea, but universally, they're from outer space.
I mean, it could come through the Earth, right? Like, what if it comes from down rather than up?
If it went through the Earth, I doubt we'd find it. It'd probably be long gone.
If a rock that originally came from Earth landed on Mars, it would technically be a meteorite with the origin of this island Earth.
Have you heard of the panspermia theory?
That's right. Oh my God, yes, I have actually. But speaking of sperm, this story is an older, but it's definitely one of Lovecraft's more popular ones. I mean, he was already writing a bunch at this point in 1927 when it came out. It's a very short story. It's about like 17 pages long. And also, I find it unique that they did this story because this is one of those stories that is kind of removed from the overall Cthulhu mythos kind of thing. I mean, this movie kind of ties it in a neat way, barely, but that's really all you need for Lovecraft, because Lovecraft himself was pretty vague about the whole mythos himself. You know, it wasn't until August Derleth and all them folks kind of got their ropes around it, because he viewed it as a continuing mythology himself. I mean, he considered the Hester or whatever from the Yellow King part of the Cthulhu mythos, you know, and he didn't come up with that.
Well, it's kind of strange because, like, it's the same thing that, like, Stephen King did latter career, but for some reason with Lovecraft, everybody loved it. Because, like, Stephen King, everything turned into, like, oh, well, it's all connected to the book Insomnia, and it's all part of the Dark Tower, and yada, yada, yada. There's weird.
Light examples of that in Stephen King's earlier work. For instance, the chef from The Shining, Dick Hallorann, is in this club fire that takes place in the 50s. There's a black nightclub that gets burned down in the novel It. And Dick Hallorann is aware of the danger before anybody else and saves several people. So, like, there's crossover in early King books. But,
okay.
from what I understand, the Gunslinger Saga really goes meta on the next level.
And I have even seen a couple episodes of that Castle Rock show, and I'm not the well versed in the Stephen King averse. So I always felt like I was trying to figure out what movie it's from, and I didn't really care. But anyway, but I it's good that you bring up Stephen King, because I mean, for those of you out there who don't know who H.P. Lovecraft is, he's probably the most famous horror fiction writer between Poe and, I would say, Stephen King. I would say between those two epochs, he probably is the most famous.
He was concurrent with the guy who's writing Conan. So this is the same time period. This is slightly
early
above,
1900s.
And that's why I think it's cool to do this movie on film, because part of the whole scariness of it is that part of the whole title is Color Out of Space. It emits a color that the human eye has not seen and possibly can't even perceive correctly. It's that notion. Science was still kind of getting off, where in getting off, in science, in the early part of that year, scientific discovery was rapidly expanding.
Yeah.
And I think that prospect really terrified Lovecraft. The fact that there is light that the human eye literally cannot perceive.
Well,
and I think
I read about his inspiration for this mysterious color that is, almost imperceivable or has different effects on people. And I think he was 14 and he got super high, and his friend said, what I see as red is not what you see as red? And Lovecraft, that blew his fucking mind. And he wrote a short story about it.
Well, that would explain why Richard Stanley wanted to do this, because if I know anything about that guy, he loves to smoke the ganja.
I want to give you guys the audience, a second taste of what you're in for with this movie, because aside from Richard Stanley directing, the lead in the film is one Nicolas Cage. So,
I know it. Yeah, I know. And I've softened a lot on Nick Cage in my old age. I really have. I think in the right role, he's very useful and very good. This unfortunately was not one of those movies.
I gotta be honest, I appreciate him because of Mandy. I think Mandy really made me reappreciate him.
Sure. And like I said, I think for the right role, I just and again, and maybe it's me just because I'm married to the source material, because in the book, Nahum Gardner's madness resembles more of a docile. He's very, almost lethargic throughout all of it. And to see kind of Nick Cage kind of switch accents at least once or twice, seemed, I don't know, maybe it just seemed too manic and almost just too hammy, I guess. I don't know. I wanted to like it, and I was unimpressed. There was a lot of eye rolling.
It is Nicolas Cage going full Nicolas Cage, which is somewhat justified in this case.
Sure.
But even
I didn't hate it.
I had some laughs when Nicolas Cage, when he was still sane, was yelling about the alpacas and feeding the alpacas.
Offering the alpaca milk. That's a famous, you want some, it hard cuts away from that scene, but that did linger with me, where I was like, boy, that is one way to deliver a line. And also, let's not forget the other starling, cast of this member. Jolie Richardson, she's, great. But the old man in there's a typical, it is in throughout Lovecraft, there is usually an old man who knows everything somehow. Tommy Chong is the last person I expected to see and for that person to be.
I think it's worth noting, there's a character type that I have always called the Doomsayer. Tommy Chong is the Doomsayer in this movie. For an example, if you've seen the original Friday the 13th, there's a character named Crazy Ralph. He is the Doomsayer in Friday the 13th, and Tommy Chong fills that role here. Some of the other cast are... I was surprised that I recognized several of the younger cast. The teen boy was in the film The Guest, which is a pretty good movie that I enjoy. Also, the youngest child, the bespectacled boy who's,
Jack.
A very cute child, was in the Haunting of Hill House series that was on Netflix.
All right. It's a unique cast, and that's why even for Nick Cage, as much as he goes full on Nitro Nick Cage, which again is appropriate in some cases, but I don't know. But Tommy Chong was the one where I was like, okay, I've either just got to roll with it and just let it go, or I'm turning off this fucking movie. Because it's Tommy Chong, guys. I mean, like it's.
What I think is fun about that is that normally, like the doomsayer, as you call them, Zach, or or often just the person who is there to just vomit exposition,
Correct.
is usually a very boring ass character. It's always like an old man with books, or just somebody kind of boring. Like sometimes sometimes you'll have a fun one, like when it was in Final Destination, and Tony Todd shows up and he's like,
"It inside a fury that could terrorize even the Grim Reaper, and you don't even want to fuck with that, Mac Daddy."
If you've ever seen the film Cabin in the Woods, there's I think they call him the Harbinger in that, but there's a character who's like a gas station attendant who fills the same role.
Yeah, I mean, I've heard the reason that Tommy Chung's in this movie is that Richard Stanley used to be his pot dealer.
I believe that. He owns a couple pot stores in Colorado. Not for nothing. I love Tommy Chong. I'm a big booster of Tommy Chong. I am. So that's why I've decided early on, once you see Tommy Chong in his outfit, you're like, okay, well, he's playing type. Like he doesn't have to do much. He's just doing what he does. And then it wasn't until the very end where I'm like, okay, well, you made it work a little bit. But it's still, it was very, very jarring for this to be like a serious Lovecraftian adaptation where everybody's very dreadful and everybody's very paranoid, and for Tommy Chong it's just sort of like, what's up, dudes? That 70s show, am I right?
I'm gonna go ahead and say that there is some similarities to this in The Lighthouse, in that there's also things in this movie where I'm not sure if it's supposed to be drama or comedy at times. But
it's always a good sign for a Lovecraft film.
Just as an early, just get it in early, rounding out this family of five, Nick Cage, his wife, and their 3 kids, 2 boys, 1 girl, is Tommy Chong, obviously lives near them, and also the sort of point of view character, kind of main character, but kind of
Oh, you
not.
mean Ward Phillips?
Yeah.
Ward's his middle name, H is his first name, get it?
Yeah. He's what is he? He's like a
hydrologist. He's a hydrologist and also knows radiation burns pretty well.
Yeah.
Yeah. Can identify him on site on many, many different types of animals,
He provides narration at the beginning and end of the movie that is directly from the short story.
Indeed.
Slightly rejiggered, but yeah.
I'd almost argue this film almost seems to not have a protagonist, like, properly.
Yeah.
I agree completely. Which is appropriate for Lovecraft.
Well, it's also something this guy's done in the past. Like, he has a very odd... Like, I'm interested to hear this from you guys just because it's your first time, I think, seeing, like, a weird-ass Richard Stanley film. But his films all have very strange structure. Like, Dust Devil wasn't structured like the Campbell line. It was structured like a spiral. So you had all these characters that never actually interacted at the same time until the very end of the movie. So it was like everyone was trying to find somebody else in the movie as they were hunting each other down until at the end when it got, the guns, not guns came out, some guns came out, but it got crazy at the end. And in this one, I actually, like, just out of curiosity, I was like writing down the scares as they happened in the movie. And it went from, first one was like 34 minutes, second one was 51 minutes, and then after that it was like once every 10 minutes, just crazy shit kept happening. But even with like Nicolas Cage's performance, it sounded, did you guys think that he sounded a little bit like Trump? Or did you think more Vampires Kiss?
I don't know.
You know what? This is something I was going to mention. I think this is a movie. We talked about this vaguely earlier, but about this topic earlier. But I think this movie wears some of its non-Lovecraft influences on its sleeves. I got a lot of Jack Torrance off of Nicolas Cage. And also their bedroom. Just the way the bedroom was shot, the way it looked, like it reminded me of a set from The Shining. The Thing with the alpacas where they merge into one beast could not be more The Thing if it tried.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I will
question.
say that the mom and the kid merging, though, is probably the first time I've seen that, and it was horrifying.
Yeah.
And that's actually a cool thing that's not part of the original short story, I think. I don't think anything... Well, and again, Lovecraft's very purposely vague about the horror in the attic or whatever. This is going to drive you crazy, but the first performance I thought of was just another Nick Cage performance, and that was that shitty Bad Lieutenant movie that I hated so much that we covered on this fucking podcast.
I think you mean that really fun Bad Lieutenant movie that I enjoyed the hell out of, and we argued a lot about.
Fucking
yeah, that was that movie.
See, and that's I was hoping, again, having familiarized myself with the source material, that's how I thought Nick Cage was going to play it. I thought he was going to play it more docile, and I was like, okay, I want to see manic Nick Cage, but kind of like hunkered down, you know, like the weight of everything is that he's deteriorating. It's so brittle and gray, you know, like so when it just turned back into just, you know, warp speed Nick Cage, I was disappointed. Maybe it's just me not managing my expectations, which is usually true in most movies. But what I will say about Stanley, because I'm not familiar with Richard Stanley at all, in the slightest. You know, like I heard that he was doing this movie and that he was actually a competent director, though, I mean, I'm sure if you asked a couple of people, they would question that. I think given the scope of this production, I think it's perfect for him to make a comeback. I think this is exactly what a guy like him is perfect for. This is what he can do. My differing of his aesthetic choices, well, notwithstanding, but I mean, also, I mean, you're taking on an impossible task adapting Lovecraft anyway. Like, I think that it's impossible, but and I wanted to ask you guys this: is it because we try to make it fit as a movie, like having it set in modern times? Now, again, in the original story, is basically the surveyor, the Ward Phillips character, hearing it from Amy Pierce, who in the movie is the sheriff, but let's call him Tommy Chong for usefulness purposes, hearing about the Gardner family that happened back in like 1880. So like the original story took place long time ago, and I almost wonder if it would have worked better if they had meant to obtain that. And that's why I want to ask you guys that maybe us trying to fit it into a movie to update it, not that I didn't appreciate the updated tones of it, and I'll get into that later, but like I thought of Jeremy Brent's Sherlock Holmes. You know, it was a TV show that came out in the 80s. Jeremy Brent played Sherlock Holmes, and a couple people played Watson, but it was on ITV, and it's literally the closest thing I've seen to straight adapting just the short stories, just the Conan Doyle stories. And it's, in my opinion, it's the best of the whole canon. They've been doing that forever. So maybe if we just try to do it, not fit it into a movie, would that serve? I don't know.
I think because of the topic of The Lighthouse last week, we did talk about the difficulty of adapting H.P. Lovecraft, and a couple efforts we thought worked and some we didn't, such as In the Mouth of Madness. But yeah, go ahead, Chris.
It's kind of hit and miss with Lovecraft stuff, because it's like, but it's also like in a modern context, it's hard to justify making some Lovecraft films.
Other than it's public domain and it's free, you don't have to pay an estate or nothing.
No, I mean his like personal politics.
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah, absolutely. No, well, sure. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, but you can still.
Sorry, I was just going to say that I think that they've had other films where they've taken sort of the general sense of what he was doing and then went from there. Because like for example, The Thing, we talked about it earlier. Yeah. I would say The Thing seems to me like at least the John Carpenter version, that seems to me like a H.P. Lovecraft story.
You kind of took the wind out of my sails, because I think you're completely right. I think the only way to really just do a Lovecraft movie is a Lovecraft-esque movie, because it's kind of hard. But like I said, I appreciate the ambition to try. You know, I think that it's never really been tried to attempt it. And this movie was admittedly one of the first to really just try to just do the short story as it is on the page. I mean, they took a lot of liberties in some cases, but it really is just the story. I mean, not much changes.
Well, incidentally, in terms of adapting Lovecraft, presently Richard Stanley is writing a screenplay for the Dunwich Horror, apparently.
I'll talk. I mean, that's good for him. I mean, I think he can give it a shot. You know, like, and that's straight up Lovecraft shit. I mean, that's like. Wilbur Whitley and Yog Sothoth and shit. You know, he even had the IMDb fucking thing show me that him and some other guy did a Lovecraftian fucking ritual to Yog Sothoth to make this movie, and I'm like, the fools! You can't play with that kind of shit.
H.P. Lovecraft, or excuse me, Richard Stanley has so many weird stories like that I do not know if they are all true, but they are all fascinating to hear. So I'll give him that.
It is nice to hear. I appreciated the fact that he tried.
Well, let me ask you this: like, what would be an H.P. Lovecraft story then? Because to me, like, I know he does weird fiction, but he's not the first guy who did weird fiction, and he isn't like he's the most known now. But there are other people that did this that we could be making reference to, like the guy who wrote The Great God Pan, which I think might have been Madchen. I don't remember. Or you mentioned it earlier, the King in Yellow, which is a surprisingly unpleasant book to read.
It's because it's centered around a book that is so boring. A play that makes everybody so boring.
That's the most heartwarming part of the whole thing is the book itself. Like it goes straight for calling people Orientals a few times in a way that is not the greatest.
Yeah.
We haven't
not the greatest.
touched on it much, but I think Lovecraft would be much chagrined to know that the only survivor of this film is the black guy, because he was not afraid to use some heavy words when describing black people and or characterizing them.
Most of the time. Yeah, most of the time. I that's why I most Lovecraft fans I know look that square in the eye. They don't try to hide it or even try to acknowledge it if you're a fan. I mean, I got into Lovecraft when I was like in 15 and I was really into Neurosis and all that apocalyptic doom shit really appealed to me. Yeah, exactly. I've grown so much. I've grown so much. Once you learn about him, you sort of like you do understand that he was actually a pretty horrible person with some pretty horrible points of view, but I did appreciate the notion of horror of the unknown. And that's why, I don't know, I think to answer your question, Borf, about what kind of Lovecraft would you do? I mean, honestly, you'd have to go with his more adventurous types. They're very few and far between, but for me, and it's a daunting task to do, would be the Dream Quest of Unknown Kadath. I mean, that's the one that actually has a beginning, fucking middle, and an end. There's one protagonist, unlike most of his short stories where it's a guy saying, I have now the only witness. It's every Melville, it's everybody's Ishmael. This is the only one who's like Randolph Carter dreamed. It's more of a, omniscient prose. So I think that would probably adapt well. However, you are going to have to contend with the fact that Moon Beasts keep slaves on the moon.
Coincidentally, as you said that, I just heard a police siren somewhere in the background coming to pull you away because of that opinion.
It's America, baby. What do you want? But anyway, I think I want to get into actually the nitty gritty of the actual film real quick because I want to talk about the points where I was disappointed in this movie. There was 2 points that I was disappointed. I was disappointed in their reliance on horror tropes. Now, you say Richard Stanley does this kind of stuff all the time, but specifically there are 2. The jump scares. There's 1 or 2 jump scares. The reliance on them, I thought we were going to do, I don't know, to do a Lovecraft with a jump scare, I think is sort of cheap, but that's a little one. Really, the monster vision.
Not only is it a jump scare, it's a jump scare involving a cat.
Yeah, it's the most classic horror movie trope of ever, and I thought we were doing a Lovecraft here. So anyway, I was disappointed in that.
It's like a weird mutant cat, but it's very like, I know you're getting into it, but the movie has some moments that are incredibly uneven to the point where it almost seems like there was more movie that just got cut out. Because like there's a scene where I'm going to spoil this a little bit. Jolie Richardson straight up cuts off 2 parts of her finger, like all the way off on the end. And it's a very disturbing, sort of scary moment that reminded me of like, there's a section in the movie Suicide Circle, if anybody remembers, all the way back in 2001 when that came out. There's someone cuts off their finger and it's like cooking and it's like handled in a way where they don't deal with the horror. They deal with showing the audience the horror, but the person in the moment doesn't experience it. So I thought that was very strange that they throw out that a character completely cuts off fingers, gets them magically surgically reattached, and then they're right back at the house. It seems like they needed the parents to leave, and they just threw a scene in to make them leave so the kids could have trouble at the house. It felt really weird.
It's a small budget, Borf. Nick Cage is only guaranteed for that long. You gotta cut down. He gets paid by the hour, and I'm sure he got rate pay for this, but still.
I guess they have like light justification for many things. Oh, the other reference that I think that this openly calls out to is The Evil Dead, not just because the girl has the Necronomicon, which is obviously a Lovecraft thing in and of itself, but because there's a scene where a tree kills somebody, a classic Evil Dead.
Again,
It's also
Anyway.
funny because that's also, I think that's actually a reference to another book. There's a book called The Willows, which that character who's running around at the end was reading. That's an early weird fiction Lovecraftian thing, which if you think some of Lovecraft's books sound boring, The Willows is about otherworldly trees that have a general sense of menace, and that's it.
well,
It's a whole camping trip around
Colorado,
these scary trees.
in Color Out of Space, I mean, there is and there's a shot in my head when I would read this book, and I thought of it. I've held it with me ever since I read it when I was, fucking 12 years old or whatever. Because in the story, there's a lot of commentary about the trees seem to move when there is no wind. And I was really kind of looking forward to that image. I'm glad they gave it to me at the end with good old Sheriff Pierce getting got that way. Spoiler alert. But I really had this image of the little boy just staring out into nothingness, and his hair isn't moving, but this tree is just wildly going. And I don't know. There's a moment.
little
That
bit with
reminds
that.
me.
They have a little bit with that with the car when Nicolas Cage is trying to
that
turn
is
his car
true,
on.
and I appreciate the fact that having it in updated times, and I think even Lovecraft would appreciate it. Is how it would affect modern devices, how the color would affect. Because like they go in the book, they go through this pretty boring scientific process of them trying to study this substance, and so I think Lovecraft would appreciate the modernness of how it would deal with modern machines, and I did too in many respects. But the one thing I did not fucking appreciate, and this is where I had to white knuckle my way through this movie, was the monster vision when the bug is crawling out of the goddamn. Every shitty horror movie relies on this fucking stupid ass effect, and it hasn't been good. It's never going to be good. Why do we keep doing this shit? The last time I've seen it done well was Predator. That was the last time I've seen that done well.
With me, some of that stuff, I almost wondered that when I was saying it seems uneven, there's stuff like that where I wonder how long the script in the form it was sitting around with Richard Stanley, because like the teenage daughter is also really into like Wiccan, like being a witch, which is fine. I know people do that, but it was super popular in the 90s. And like when you watch The Island of Dr. Moreau, the Fairuza Balk character has a whole lot of goth going on. Like she's very goth. So
it was her bread and butter in the 90s.
Yeah, so it's really weird when you see it and you're like, oh, well, there's a character that's not exactly goth who's kind of like doing a version of Wiccan. It was just a very odd choice. It was a strange choice. And so many odd things like that in this movie.
This movie is a series of odd choices.
There's several things like that. The Wiccan thing comes up a couple times. She's burning some hair to like protect her mother at the beginning of the movie, and later she does this like self-cutting protection spell. None of that really pays off. It seems like it doesn't have any effect on the thing that is encroaching on their lives. But there's other things like that I don't quite like. There's this strong implication that the mayor deeply despises Nick Cage for some reason or another. I can't remember why. It doesn't really matter. It doesn't have anything to do with the story. I'm not entirely sure why it's there. And also there's a scene briefly, and I'm unsure if this is meant to be like tying it to broader themes, where Nick Cage is watching something about environmental collapse. Is that supposed to be like, this is a meditation on global warming? Because it certainly had nothing. I had no connection to that whatsoever from the rest of the movie.
Huh. I hadn't considered that, but that is interesting to
One
do.
of the, but somebody asked him some questions about this in an interview, and I was that's why I asked you guys about the Trump thing earlier, because he suggested that some of what he'd written was about the Trump inauguration. And there were, I guess, scenes originally that got cut where they explicitly were watching Trump give a speech or something, and then Nick Cage started going off. The character started going off. But yeah, they didn't really do much more with it. I mean, it is odd that it's, a reality that's changing to make the aliens more comfortable. I think that played a better role in Annihilation, though.
I agree. I think this... Yeah. Annihilation ate this movie's lunch a bit. I think it's better executed. A lot of the stuff with the weird colors and the environment around them changing in these subtle ways and time kind of losing its meaning. All of that's an Annihilation, and I think it's stronger there and more consistent there, and thematically makes more sense there than it does here.
And another subplot that I didn't really understand, and they almost kind of alluded to it at the end in the peak of Nathan's madness, was the whole subplot about Nick Cage's dad. You know, like I don't know. It seemed like it had something to do with the drinking problem that wasn't really, you know, put. And I mean, it wasn't. It didn't even feel human. It just felt staged. You know, it felt like. And then by the end, we're just like, I know I'm not like my father. Like, I literally was like, well, I guess we just wrapped up that subplot. I'm glad that you fucking came to that conclusion. I wish you could include us in sometimes.
I will say the one thing that I noticed in this, and I don't know, I'm not going to speak too much about people who might have been like this, but if you've ever been around coke fiends that are in the throes of manic coke nonsense, they will sometimes change topic very abruptly and have extremely emotionally revealing things they say to you that they will forget that they said to you about 5 minutes later.
Borif, do you mean to tell me that show business is rife with cocaine use? I mean, I won't hear of it, sir. I won't hear of it.
No, it's a moral business. I don't know if that's why they made the 10 Commandments, the movie. It's because they're so moral.
Right.
And then sent them
and
to
then Passion of the
courthouse
Christ.
as a thing.
That's right.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Passion of the Christ. That worked out so well. That's right. That roller coaster of a blockbuster.
But yeah, I mean, I actually enjoyed the weird manicness of some of the performances when it started to hit the fan. I really wish that the movie was just the middle portion of the movie to a degree. Because like when the special effects got too bad or too intense, it was like it took me out. And at the beginning, it was a little too slow. But in the middle, there's a good chunk of like, all right, the alpacas are fucking monsters. You're going to have to like deal with Jolie Richards as a monster. Your kid's getting like weird and going down a well. You know, there's stuff that happened that was, oh God, everything just fell. There was stuff that happened that was fun, and I wish it had been more fun.
I think there's individual like set pieces or moments that did indeed work for me. I just don't think the whole thing hangs together super well. As a whole.
Yeah, it's too much. And then again, like the hero of our story, Sheriff Pierce and Ward, who's our only survivor, and it's sort of, I don't know. I felt like, and then even Borif, I want to ask you about this too, not to change subjects drastically, but one of the things that I kind of confused me about was the use of like stadium lights throughout the night scenes in the forest. Like it seems like it was part of whatever farm they were renting out. And it was just going to add extra light. And I know that it is also common to do that to sort of emphasize fog, that kind of stuff. You want a lot of backlight to kind of make it look more spooky. I'm kind of wondering why they did. Do you think that was a necessity? Because I'm just too married to the source material, but I always like the idea that this story's mostly told in darkness and the only light you get is starlight. I sort of wish we would have leaned towards that, because this movie was very bright. But I know it takes place in the summer, and the color itself is very bright. And that's another question I'll ask. But I wanted to ask you, Borif, what did you think about that?
I think that in certain circumstances it was required here, because it's like you'd like to have a film set in darkness, but then like actually shooting a film in darkness,
for sure,
can't see anything.
For sure.
And in certain circumstances, like the layout of the location was so important to understand what was happening in the story that I think they needed to have that. But it's also just the pragmatic thing that they shot this in, I think, Portugal. So like they had consistent changes of weather, just like you have in Colorado.
For sure.
So I think they were doing that mostly just to really get away with as much as they could with like fog and just trying to get some of the production value into it.
Okay, it seemed odd to me, but I think what I did was worried about seeing the cover of the film and some of the production stills from the film was how they were going to do the actual color. The color out of space. Because when I'm reading it, I always thought of like a really hard black light. You know, that's just how I pictured it again into heavy metal when I was in middle school. What do you expect? So when I saw that and how bright it was, but I thought it worked though. I thought that it still kind of made it was still an alien sort of color, and I thought it kind of worked.
I mean, I'll have to admit, I am partially colorblind. Or not partially, I'm colorblind of blue-green. So for me, the color out of space was about purple. It was all about purple. I could tell it was purple. Normally, it looks blue to me, but in this case, I could tell it was purple. So for me, going in and seeing a color that normally I can never see was kind of exciting because I was like, I identify that as purple.
Well, I am red-green colorblind. But no, it seemed.
How did the
purple,
movie look to you?
It was sort of a pinkish, purplish kind of thing. Yeah. I don't have as much trouble with that particular color as perhaps you do. Briefly, I want to circle back to something that just crossed my mind. Russell, you were talking about horror tropes that annoy you. There was a couple others that annoyed me. And the thing is, even when you were talking about the woman getting her finger stitched back on and they come back, this movie has like a defense mechanism that's kind of a cop-out in that everything's insane and time doesn't matter. So you can justify anything, but also it's kind of a cop-out reason to let people do stupid things. 2 points that stood out to me, both having to do with the teenage boy. There's a scene where he and his sister are going to escape on horseback. And the sister's like, go into the dark barn and get the tack, which is like the saddle. And my thought was, why do you need the fucking saddle? Just leave on the horse. Don't go into the barn and get the saddle. You have the horse. This is the horse mode of transportation.
The horse is anxious to go. The horse is anxious to go.
Forget the fucking saddle. Just go. And the other is he hears his dog whimpering in the well where all of the horrors came out of.
I know it. Yeah, right. So let me go. No, I know what it's done to the alpacas, but the dog might be fine.
Yeah.
Yeah. So well, there was the additional little like character thing that they introduced and then they paid off in that scene for no reason. Because it was like he climbs down into the well and scenes earlier in the movie, they have this dumb conversation of, oh, you found Grandpa's old goggles. His what do you call it?
The goggles, they do nothing.
Yeah, the goggles, they do nothing. Literally, he like puts them on in the last 10 seconds as the glowing blue monster tentacle comes out to grab him, just to scream because I guess he can see more of the color now wearing those things, or maybe he can't because it blocks that color. I don't know. It was such a weird moment.
You brought up them driving back with cutting off the finger. What was that opera thing that Nick Cage was doing?
That's just fucking Nick Cage, I think, man.
Yeah, I guess. See, you're just like, okay, all right. Here we go, movie.
Early in the film, when the meteor lands and the family is first reacting to it, I thought, like, each family member does react a little differently. For a second, I thought it was going to be tied to senses, because it seems like the little boy could see things.
Me too.
And
he's wearing glasses.
Nicolas Cage kept on being like, it smells like a burnt dog. Don't you smell that? And everybody else is like, no. But it doesn't really pan out beyond that. I don't know that there's like, all of that just kind of goes by the wayside. It's like they have this list of, they went to like the D&D madness effects list. And they rolled the dice a few times. We're like, Nick Cage gets that one, the little boy gets that one, and the little girl gets that one. And it seems so disjointed.
It's weird because normally when you're seeing a horror movie, they give you the rules. Like if it's in the what is it? Don't make a noise. The fucking scary monster gonna hear you if you don't fart. Whatever is it?
I thought. A Quiet Place.
A Quiet Place.
Don't Breathe is also a horror movie about an old man. Like some people break into his house and he's a blind man who's coming after them.
I mean, for me in those movies, I'm always like thinking more about the fact that like, I would be personally terrified of farting because when you get scared, sometimes you gotta fart. And then if there's a spooky ooky monster, you don't want him to know where you are. But anyway, the thing is that in...
Well, A Quiet Place 2 hasn't come out yet, so we'll see. Maybe that's a plot point.
That might be it. But it's stuff like that where they tell you the rules, and then you have, like, a way you can get into the story. You can imagine yourself in the situation. But in this one,
but you can't do that with Color Out of Space. You literally can't. Yeah. The more you explain what this thing is, honestly, Doctor Who would have had this shit solved like that. Like, said, you need to get the fuck out of here and go long way that way.
I mean, the crazy thing is this one has been adapted so many times, and I would say that some of the adaptations of this one I think have been a little bit more successful just from a continuity of theme. So like I would say The Blob is an interpretation of this story. Like the original Blob, where it's a meteorite that lands, there's a monster inside, starts eating people and goes around the town, and then they got to deal with this weirdness that's not human, and it's a monster movie, right? So it's stuff like that where I think that they simplify rules in other movies, but in this one it's not like that.
Yeah, well, I mean, even the short story, you know, even though Lovecraft's not clear of what the mom exactly turns into, what the story does make clear is what happens to the rest of the farm and what it's doing to every living thing around it. And they kind of punted on that too, other than just like everything's mutating into this weird color. I mean, the original story, he wanted the scary part to be the vapor, the globular ball thingy or whatever, and there's a billion of them. They all go up into space and God knows where they are, and I'll never drink the water and whatever. So you can't do that with Lovecraft. You can't play those kind of easy tropes when you're trying to do a Lovecraft, because part of the horror and the dread is you kind of not knowing what the fuck you're looking at.
Well, yeah, but we just said they have also like good adaptations, like The Thing, where it's like you know what the rules are, don't get touched, or like Alien.
But
where it's
but
like,
that
don't,
was
don't
that those aren't straight adaptations. Is my point.
That's true.
You know, like
that's
and with the thing's different because the rules they kind of figure out the rules as they go along, but you also get consistency in everybody's trapped. You know, everybody's. You know, they're stuck in a frozen wasteland. You know, that's that. At least here, you never get the sense that they're actually trapped. You know, you never get the sense that
leave varies. The girl says at a certain point, "We can't leave here," though. Ward does leave shortly thereafter. Nicolas Cage has already left and come back.
Horse didn't have a problem.
Yeah, the horse left. Like, I will say, there are parts where I thought you were flirting with defying the theme a little bit, Chris, because these people weren't so stuck. But I'm not going to go there. I do think, speaking of adaptations that are not direct adaptations of H.P. Lovecraft, I mean, we mentioned it before, but Annihilation seems like an adaptation of Color Out of Space that works better.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is I read the book that Annihilation is based off of. And I will say that film adaptation is an easier watch than it was a read. And it was because the guy who wrote the original story, I think he was a very technical person. I think he actually has a background, I believe, in like molecular biology or something like that.
That movie, we've discussed it 2 episodes now. When the right theme comes up, I'm going to put that on.
It's going to have to come up. Yeah, sure. We're going to have to do the thing.
I
haven't seen Annihilation.
I'll just wait on it then, because there's some stuff when you like see that movie and then you read the book, like they are very, very different experiences to the point you almost wonder if they are even the same story.
I felt the same way, although this isn't that unusual for Kubrick, but I felt the same way about A Clockwork Orange. Like that book was a completely different experience than watching that movie. And oddly enough, the movie was more pleasant. Oddly enough. So yeah, and that's why I think the most powerful point of the film is actually Tommy Chong, is when they're taking the actual speech that in the book Nahum gives to Ami Pierce, but in this it's a tape recorded of a long dead and brittle Tommy Chong. Ezra is his name. And who's better than Ezra? Had to do it.
Oh God!
So they.
I'm gonna kick you in the leg next time I see you.
Tommy Chong is better than Ezra. So then that was a fun way of actually making Tommy Chong's kind of drony, monotone voice into this kind of creepy, otherworldly terror that I think was that was my favorite part of the film. That worked. That actually worked, and that's where I said, okay, Tommy Chong, I'll give it to you.
And there are things that are effective. I mean, we've been I feel overall a little harsh on the movie. There are things that are effective. I think like a lot of, for instance, when the mother and the youngest child combine into one being, I think that effect overall looks pretty good. It did seem weird to me that everyone was concerned about the mother and no one gave a shit about the kid.
Right? No shit. Nobody even they're like, oh, Mom, everything's okay. And I guess Jack's just like back there. You could hear him. You could hear him crying.
Whimpering, yeah.
Yeah, right.
No one gave a fuck about the kid.
That was weird. I wonder if they had a scene and they cut it because they realized they couldn't get that range from the kid, maybe. But
I wonder about that
I'm
too
not
with
sure.
the dad subplot too. I really do wonder that with
Well,
the
it
dad
seems
subplot.
like it wouldn't be, because like the mother doesn't really respond at that point. She's just whimpering. And the kid, I'm sure, is more than capable of whimpering.
Yeah, well, I mean, they do say Lavinia at one point in unison, but I think it's puppets at that point.
Yeah. Well, and good puppetry too. I will give it that. I mean, I it's a rare form you see these days, and I know there's a lot of budget constraints in this movie, and that's why I also, knowing that this film was made very limited resources, I do appreciate it for what it was. It did accomplish the scope of what I was looking for in this story fairly well. All things being equal. That's why another reason why you couldn't make this set in the 1800s, because it'd just be too fucking expensive.
Well, one of the things that I think was really fantastic in this too that I just wanted to mention is the music. I don't know how you guys felt
I
about it.
completely agree. I actually enjoyed it quite a bit. I was really iffy on it at the beginning, but by the end of it, I really was on board.
Yeah, it kind of feels a little bit like the movie Akira to a degree, where you hear the album and then you see the movie, and it's like someone wrote a soundtrack and then made a movie and cut the soundtrack into the movie without writing the soundtrack for the movie. So it was interesting.
I don't know how you do it, Borf. It's been 10 years, but you have a pipeline into my brain, because that was the first fucking thing I thought of was fucking Akira. It's cool. Like I said, at first because I kind of when we did The Lighthouse, I really liked that soundtrack, and like the horns and the very brassy works of it and the very low tones of it. That's always how I picture a Lovecraft. So to do it in something that I don't expect and yet it still work, I think that's an accomplishment. So well done. I was like I said, I was iffy, but they got me.
The guy who did the music on this one is a guy named Colin Stetson. He did the music for Hereditary.
Okay.
So if you've heard the Paimon Rises or whatever that is, that's one of his. He's an incredibly talented and incredibly interesting musician. But his own albums are all kind of electronic. So it's they have an electronic sound.
Does he go by a different name? Does he have a pseudonym?
No, it's Colin Stetson.
Okay.
He does, if anybody's curious to just get an example of it, you can go out and look up his song, All This I Do for Glory, which is off an album he did, which is incredibly catchy, but also sounds like you're in a horror film. It sounds like you're about to be murdered by someone. It's very strange.
It worked for this film, and since I guess we got to grade these movies eventually. I wanted to talk about the return of Richard Stanley. Now, Borf, I know you can go off and on about it, but since we were talking about how disjointed this movie was, how fractured it kind of felt and inconsistent, do you think this was just growing pains for Richard Stanley? Of it's been 20 years since he's made a feature film. Do you? You would be more aware of it than I would be.
I do not think these are growing pains. I think this is Richard Stanley, because when I watched Hardware, there are a lot of odd... We can watch those movies at some point. I would advise anybody who's curious about this movie, go check out Dust Devil and go check out the other film he did, Hardware. Hardware is a fairly famous one. Dust Devil's a little less well known, but all of his stories have very odd parts that are kind of introduced. So in Dust Devil, it balanced out well because there were a lot of odd choices that were made, but they were all set in South Africa. So for some reason, the otherness of it being in South Africa made it seem okay that all these strange things kept happening. That said, the first time I saw Dust Devil, I hated it. I hated it with a passion. I was 18, and I thought it was one of the worst films I'd seen. However, I then saw it again in college, and the difference is there was a director's cut that came out. Dust Devil was one that had gotten so terribly cut by Weinstein after the fact that it was something that you didn't really get to see that movie until you saw the director's cut. So
another victim of Weinstein.
Yeah.
The list keeps growing.
Well, I mean, it's interesting because you see movies like this and you kind of wonder what would have happened with these people if this guy hadn't been in their lives. With Richard Stanley, I don't know if he would have gone on to make great movies. I don't know if he would have gone on to make movies we would have liked. I mean, I like The Color Out of Space personally, but I don't know if we were barred from seeing other things he would have done by Weinstein. Well, and
practice makes perfect, right? So the more you do it, the more refined you're going to be. And that's where I'm kind of, I wonder about, being 20 years out of it and the nightmare experience that was the Island of Dr. Monroe would burn anybody out of show business. I don't care what is in you. But also, he's the one who cast Val Kilmer and Marlon Brando, so he only has himself to blame.
I think, well, speaking of the practice, but I liked this movie at least well enough that I hope that his Dunwich Horror gets made and he gets another
completely
crack
agree.
at an H. I think if the lightning strikes just right, this guy could make a really great adaptation of a Lovecraft tale. I also think
the instincts are there. The instincts are there.
There's an interesting moment when I believe Nicolas Cage is watching a very blurry television, and I believe it's a Marlon Brando film. And I wonder if that had anything to do with his experiences on Dr. Moreau, if that was some kind of intentional, I don't know, inclusion.
I bet you that was intentional. I didn't put that together in my head, but I 100% think that's intentional. It was Roman Holiday, I think, is what they were watching.
I strongly doubt that was just a coincidence.
Yeah.
However, I mean, watching that Lost Souls documentary, which it's free on Amazon, if you want to know if you're interested in nightmare productions like I am, it's a good one. It's not particularly well made, but it's good enough, and it's very crazy stories. It sounds like
they
to
got
me
him
that
this gig.
Yeah,
that was one of the things that SpectreVision watched. And like,
really?
This guy needs
to give another shot. Well,
yeah, this
good,
guy
good
also
for him.
gave, speaking of documentaries about famously troubled productions, Jodorowsky's Dune, I believe he gave interviews in as well, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah,
and Marlon Brando was featured on another nightmare shoot documentary called Heart of Darkness. So it's not. I'm seeing a common theme. It's a mystery. But like I think that. One of the things you could tell is that he really is passionate about what he does. I mean, he throws himself into it, and you almost want somebody like that. One of the things that my twin commented on, out of seeing this, that you could tell that he is a fan of Lovecraft. Like, this is his hobby horse. So I agree with you, Zach. I liked it enough to where I want to see him do it again. It's almost like, like if you contrast Mad Max Fury Road with the first Mad Max movie, you're gonna see two different movies.
It's like this is the rough pilot for a show that has a lot of potential.
Yeah, right. Like our show. Hey.
Yeah. Well, the thing is it's like, I know he's been negative on it. I actually do like this movie quite a lot. I know that we're like kind of negging it. The stuff in it that I enjoy, I really do enjoy. But he is talking about doing some of that stuff again because this got him enough notoriety. So even like we're talking about him talking about doing like another Lovecraft, but one of the things that came up was the possibility of him doing his version of the movie that got that caused so much trouble, the Island of Dr. Moreau.
Oh my God! Really?
He still had. Well,
Gilliam did it. Why not?
Here's the deal, though. When you watch the documentary, you probably saw it. Like the film they wanted to make was so fundamentally different than the one that came out that I think what he wanted to make was something more along the lines of Nightbreed, the weird monster movie that was like a little more sex than company or that the country was comfortable with from Barker in the 90s, but like something that level, which at this point could happen. Production values have gone down, but at the same time, it's like, why would you want to go back and drink more from the poison well?
Yeah, man. Like, dude, let it go.
He heard his dog in the well, and now he's climbing down. He put the goggles on.
He's got the goggles this time. He's ready for it.
That's the thing waiting at the bottom. It's a dog with like a man's body. Who's like, hey, I've been down here for years.
Remember me?
I've been trapped down here with a copy of Hot Shots Part 2 for the last 20 years. Or whatever that is. Secret Agent. That's the one he was
Secret
in.
Agent.
Val Kilmer one.
And probably that movie's still pretty funny, but not because of Val Kilmer. But anyway, I think that if this is the return of Richard Stanley, then I wish him, God willing, Godspeed, go for it, do the Dunwich Horror. I would suggest maybe getting a budget, like getting. I mean, I know that's going to be a tough sell for a guy like you, but like I suggest giving it a go. But as far as doing Island Dr. Moreau again, no, dude, no, let it go. I know Gilliam eventually got to do Don Quixote eventually, but like
that movie I have not watched yet. It is one of those movies that everybody was excited that it was occurring, I think more in theory than in practice. And then when everyone watched it, everyone said basically like, oh yeah, this is boring. This is well trodden. We've seen this all before. This is a movie that should have come out 25 years ago as opposed to being in production so long.
You wanted you wanted Brazil, but got Thailand.
Yeah, reminds me of my shitty student film that took 10 years to finish. And
hey, you're preaching to the choir here, homie.
Oh God, spending $15,000 on a student film is the dumbest thing I've ever done in my life.
But I could tell that I could see the appeal of this movie, Borif, especially for a guy like you, because you do like movies that don't take themselves that seriously. I could tell that, like, especially for horror movies, like if you make it fun, like don't bore me has always been a Borif tip.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big fan of like Vincent Price, Peter Cushing. If I'm gonna see a horror movie, just make it fun, man. Like, I don't want to see Saw. I want to see somebody like with fake fangs. I want to see Christopher Lee being a creepo. Like, yeah.
And Nick Cage going off on something, but I guess I do want to talk about the legacy of Nick Cage. Talk about a guy. He's been around forever, at least almost my entire life. And now he is taking these runs on, sort of smaller role. I mean, he was a major A-list actor. I mean, like, he was headlining movie. I mean, he's the highest paid actor in this movie, that's for sure. But still, it's not a major movie. And he seems to be more comfortable in doing that in the past, 10 years, it seems like. Do you think he's a problem to work with? Because I can't imagine he would be, because Richard Stanley would fucking kick him off at this point, because I'm not even dealing with it.
Part of it might be that motherfucker ran out of money and had to take whatever job he could. And it probably didn't help his career to appear in all this low-budget schlock. I think he got a reputation around it. I mean, it was sort of an Ouroboros of, he did this bad stuff because he needed to, and then the bad stuff started defining him a little bit.
Yeah, it's sort of like latter career Lance Henriksen, or what was the other guy? Old horror actor, Carradine. Like,
oh my God! Oh yeah, David Carradine. David Carradine.
Yeah.
Oh, John Carradine. John Carradine.
They both did the same thing. Like David Carradine, John Carradine, Peter Fonda did the same thing.
Oh yeah.
Like,
yeah.
It's
Jane Fonda started at the beginning.
Yeah,
she did the schlock at the beginning. But oh my God, John Carradine was in some. Whew, man.
I mean,
those movies.
the truth is that if a movie doesn't bore me and it's fun, I'm going to enjoy it. If a movie bores me and it's not enjoyable, I'm not going to have a good time. Like that's one change for me from like college. Like, it used to be like, I don't know if you guys have found this, but as you get older, do you want to like not waste your time with boring, like sad movies as much? Do you just want to watch stuff that's fun?
All the time. People tell me about that new Mark Ruffalo show on HBO, and I'm sure it's really good. And Richard really
Well, I've heard that's tragedy porn. Like,
is it really? Because my twin brother immediately went to Cassavetes, which longtime listeners know I'm a big fan of. So I kind of went there, but I'm also not really in the mood to watch a severe drama about twins. Because I myself am a twin, and maybe
I have a tolerance for sad movies, perhaps beyond yours. But so like Precious is a movie I hate because it seems like a movie where they just thought up a list of every bad thing that could happen and dumped it on, and it becomes so numbing and repetitive and tragedy porn. And my understanding and my reading of the plot of that Mark Ruffalo show is it is the same way, man. They just came up with a list and were like, we'll just do all of it.
Okay, yeah. Can't wait.
Should we get our final thoughts on this particular movie and then move on to the judgment area?
I think now's the time as ever. I wanted to like this movie. It's similar to The Lighthouse. I think I was a victim of my own expectations. Unlike The Lighthouse, I don't know why I expected any better from me to like a Nick Cage performance, but it's been known to happen. It has happened. I'm a big fan of Lovecraft, have been for a long time, so I admire the attempt to do a straight adaptation, even though this wasn't really a straight adaptation. And again, doing a little bit of research into this movie and Richard Stanley in general, and I'll have to eventually watch those movies. But I think it's you kind of respect the journey of like somebody getting a second chance, especially in show business. I mean, and this business is good at rewarding second chances when it happens. So if he wants to keep going with this, I think it's very likely that it could happen for him.
I think I'm probably somewhere in between the two of you on this movie, so I'll go next. There are elements, scenes, moments in this movie that I dig quite a lot. I think that like I've said, there's the bones here for something that I think is like greater than the sum of its parts, and I think this is somehow a little less than the sum of its parts. It just doesn't, it's not cohesive. It doesn't string together quite right, and so I can't give it like a full-bore, like full-throated recommendation, but I think if this is up your alley, this kind of weird sci-fi horror stuff, it is worth a watch. But if it's not, you can go ahead and jump over this one. I like aspects of this movie. I just don't think it comes together quite right.
I kind of feel similar to that. I think it's got some uneven parts. There are things in it that I love. I think emotionally, I was very into the idea of Richard Stanley coming back after, like when you see someone go through a lot of hardship, it sort of becomes like a personal thing when they finally come back and do something good, or at least they get a chance to. So like we'd mentioned Fury Road. The fact that Fury Road exists at all is a miracle. So him coming back, having a second chance, I think is really good. But I also agree with you both that there are parts of this that are not as much fun. And I have a feeling that I will probably remember this movie similar to how I remember movies like Mama or Scary Stories to Tell in the Dark, where there's some really solid, incredibly fun parts to it. But then there are parts that do not allow you to just enjoy the rest of it because it sticks out like a weird sore thumb. So I would say this one is really solid in the middle. And I am probably really solid in the middle with my scoring on this one too.
Okay. So that brings us to the scoring. Now, the way this is going to work is each of us has 10 points, right? And we are going to allocate those points out between these three movies, each in turn, and reveal them on screen. Also, for the benefit of our audio listeners, we will not just be showing these papers, we'll say what we actually scored them as well.
You mean we can't just nod at people in agreement and then have the listeners understand us?
Precisely. All right, so do you guys want to show your papers all at once, or should we go through each person for each film?
We should do them all at once, but let's do it for, like, we say a movie and then we show our score.
Okay, let's go in order.
So like, okay, so we have 10 in total, and so when we're scoring, it is based solely off personal preference, right?
Indeed.
So we're not doing any sort of a technical or any sort of a thing.
If you want to, Borif, if you want to.
If that's part of your consideration, if the story of Richard
sometimes
Stanley's return influences your score, that's allowed.
Okay.
You're damn
It's however
right.
you want to do it. This is we're flying commando on this.
Yeah, here we
Flying
go.
Commando.
All right, so let's
Alrighty.
start with Rear Window. It was our first movie.
3, 2, 1, show your placards.
All
Giving,
right, I got
Giving Rear Window a 3 on the Borf scale.
Oh, wow. I'm giving
Rear
it a
Window.
7.
It's a 3 from Borif.
I'm
It
gonna be
gets a 7
from Russell.
That's a total
Yeah.
of 10, and it gets a 4 from me. So that's a total of 14.
Okay.
14. We're gonna go ahead and give. Go ahead and move on to the Lighthouse now. The score to beat for the Lighthouse is 14. All right, 3, 2, 1.
I am giving The Lighthouse a 5.
I am giving Lighthouse a 2.
I am giving a Lighthouse also a 4. I went back and forth on which one of those to give the higher score to, and ultimately I decided I'm not going to pick. I'm going to give them both an equal amount. All right, so that's a 5, a 2, and a 4. So that is 11. That is canonically a loser. I suspect that Color Out of Space is not going to top the 14. I think it's technically impossible at this point. But let's go ahead and reveal our scores for Color Out of Space. 3, 2, 1.
On the Borf scale, it is 2 for Color Out of Space.
I went ahead with a 2 as well.
I had to go with a 1. I'm sorry, the Monster Vision. I was leaning on 2 and giving a Rear Window 6 points to give 2 points each to Lighthouse and Color Out of Space, but the Monster Vision, man, I just can't do it.
Well,
I
that
was more
does it then.
I was more stressed about the sheer amount of math I had to do to remember how to get to 10 from the numbers that I had picked, and then had to retroactively do the math until I realized
one
that
day,
I had only given it 2.
I very nearly did 0.5s to separate Rear Window and the Lighthouse. It ultimately wasn't necessary. So that means Rear Window, my pick, is our winner, and I picked
Zach
the
gets
next.
to set the movie trap.
Yeah, I don't want every episode, every theme to coordinate with current times, but I do think it's appropriate in this particular instance. I went back and forth between 2 options. Option 1 was black filmmakers, and option 2 was just shitty cops. And I kind of think we can have, ultimately, I think I'm going to go with shitty cops because I missed the film Blind Spotting when it came out a couple of years ago. I heard good things. It's on HBO, and I believe it's on Hulu for free as part of their temporary deal with HBO, so we can all access it. So I think I want to do shitty cops and start us off with Blind Spotting.
Is that Damon Wayans and Bruce Willis? Am I thinking of the same movie?
You are not. It's
Okay.
These
Oh,
Days
right.
and somebody else.
Okay.
No.
Hey. Way wrong.
Carlson
Couldn't have
was
been
all
more
set.
wrong
He was
if I tried.
It's like, okay, we're going to be watching a Damon Wayans movie. All right.
Let's go, Blake Man. Let's rock and roll.
But I think this gives you a lot of shitty cops can be a lot of things, and I think it's going to give you a lot of room to figure out something that works for you.
Borf's gonna make me
We'll
watch.
call this round "All Cops Are Bastards."
Borf's gonna make me watch. Borf's gonna make me watch Bad Lieutenant already. I can feel it. I already watched that movie once. I can
War's
fucking
gonna
feel
double
it.
Dip on the insane Nicolas Cage. Well,
Yeah, right. He's gonna make me watch that fucking just to watch
I
me
think
beat my head against
I've
the
got an
wall.
idea, but we'll have to go out into the world. We'll have to
No.
look beyond the wonderful garden that is Nicolas Cage to see if we can
Until-
pull a weed from the wild.
until we come up with another system for this, Russell, you came in second, so I'm going to give you the option of picking if you want to pick the second or third movie in this rotation.
I will pick the third. I will receive. I will let Borf do the punting.
All right, so it's
Okay.
going to be me, then Chris, then Russell for this All Cops Are Bastards / Bad Cops round. Coming up
Bad
next time
cops,
on,
bad cops.
on Movie
Bad
Trap.
cops, bad
Yeah.
cops.
Yeah, thanks for listening, and don't forget to also check out Zach Powers' additional podcast he does, The Revisionists. Where do they find it, Zach?
Anywhere where is podcasts. It's a comedy history podcast where we teach you about the real history of a thing and then make up a crazy batshit alternate version and decide which is the real history of the world at the end of the episode. It's a fun time. You can find it wherever you do your podcasting.
All right. Well, with that, I guess it's time to sign off for the week. And thanks for joining us. I guess this is Russell Carlson signing off. We'll see you guys next time.
Yeah, this is Chris Borf signing off. Feel free to jump into any of our social media anythings. You'll find them in the show notes, and let us know what you think, because while we're just doing this podcast to chat with each other, it'd be great to hear what other people think about movies like The Color Out of Space, because we have a feeling it's probably a little divisive, and it would be fun to hear other people's thoughts.
Have at me. I don't have any shame.
And
Bring that on.
speaking of rating things, go ahead. You could give us presumably we're available on iTunes at this point. You can give us a rating there, and that
Right,
helps.
unless it's a bad rating, in which case keep it
In
to
which case,
yourself,
keep it
okay?
to yourself.
Yeah, you just.
But I
you-
have been Zach Powers, and this has been the Movie Trap. We'll see you next time for Shitty Cops.
Nice one, Dad.
Yeah, I find mixing a little fennel into their feed increases the yield and improves the flavor. Would you like a taste?
Oh, no. Lactose intolerant.
Your loss.